The morning sun had barely crested over the dusty horizon when Virginia Baxter first set eyes on the weathered sign proclaiming, "Welcome to Greeley, Colorado Territory Est, 1869." Her dress was wrinkled from 3 days of hard travel, her gloved hands clutching the handle of her trunk so tightly her knuckles ached beneath the fabric. The stagecoach that had deposited her unceremoniously at the town's edge was already disappearing in a cloud of dust, leaving her alone on the wooden platform with nothing but her possessions and a letter promising employment that now seemed as substantial as the morning mist. Virginia Ginny, to those who knew her well, though there were precious few of those, now stood motionless for several minutes, taking in the scene before her. Greeley in 1872 was not the bustling center of opportunity the newspaper advertisements had proclaimed. The main street stretched before her, lined with an assortment of wooden buildings in various states of repair. A general store, a saloon, what appeared to be a small hotel, and other establishments whose purposes she couldn't immediately discern, stood like sentinels of a civilization still finding its footing in the untamed West. She had come west on the promise of a teaching position. 3 months of correspondence with the town council had assured her that Greeley was in desperate need of an educated woman to instruct their children. The position came with room and board at the home of a respectable widow, and the salary, while modest, would be enough for her to save a little each month. It was an escape from the suffocating confines of Boston society and the whispers that followed her after breaking her engagement to Edward Thornton, heir to one of the city's oldest shipping fortunes. But now, as she stood alone with her trunk, the exhaustion of travel washing over her, a new worry began to settle in her stomach. There was no one waiting to greet her. No widow, no town council representative, not a soul who seemed to be expecting a new schoolteacher from the East. Virginia straightened her back, adjusted her bonnet, and began the difficult task of dragging her trunk toward what she hoped was the center of town. The weight of it made progress slow and awkward. After moving it just 20 yards down the street, she was already breathing heavily, perspiration beginning to dot her forehead despite the cool morning air. "Excuse me," she called out to a passing woman with a basket of laundry. "I'm looking for Mrs. Whitman's boarding house. I'm the new schoolteacher." The woman paused, giving Virginia a curious once-over. "Schoolteacher? First I heard of it. Mrs. Whitman passed on last winter. Influenza took her and her youngest." Virginia felt her stomach drop. "But I have correspondence. The town council's been disbanded since Mayor Fletcher moved on to Denver. Been nearly 6 months now." "There must be some mistake," Virginia insisted, fumbling in her reticule for the letters she'd so carefully preserved. "I was promised a position. I've traveled all the way from Boston." The woman's face softened with pity. "I'm sorry, miss. Lots of things change out here, and news travels slow. If you're looking for lodging, you might try the hotel, though I don't know about work." As the woman continued on her way, Virginia stood rooted to the spot, clutching the now worthless letters in her trembling hand. She had spent nearly all her savings on the journey west, keeping only enough to see her through until her first month's wages. Without the promised position, without the arranged lodging, she was stranded in a town where she knew no one, with resources dwindling by the minute. Fighting back tears of frustration, Virginia dragged her trunk to the edge of the wooden walkway outside the general store and sank down upon it. She would rest for just a moment, she told herself, and then find the hotel. Perhaps they would have work. Perhaps someone in town needed a governess or shop assistant. She was educated, capable. Surely there would be some opportunity. The morning hours passed with excruciating slowness as Virginia sat on her trunk, watching the town come to life around her. Merchants opened their shops, wagons rolled down the dusty street, men and women went about their business. A few curious glances were cast her way, but no one stopped to inquire about the well-dressed Eastern woman perched on a trunk outside Caldwell's General Merchandise. By midday, the sun was high and merciless. Virginia had long since removed her gloves and loosened her collar, propriety giving way to the practical concerns of the heat. Her stomach growled painfully. She hadn't eaten since the previous evening's meager meal at the last stage coach stop. You planning on sitting there all day, madam? The voice startled her from her thoughts. Virginia looked up to find a tall man standing before her, his face partially shadowed by a wide-brimmed hat. He was dressed in the practical garb of a working man, sturdy pants, a faded shirt with the sleeves rolled to the elbows, and a leather vest that had seen better days. A gun belt was fastened around his hips, the weapon it held worn but well maintained. Virginia began, then stopped, unsure how to explain her predicament without appearing completely helpless. I'm waiting for someone. The man shifted his weight, revealing more of his face. He was younger than she'd initially thought, perhaps in his late 20s, with a strong jaw shadowed by several days' growth of beard. His eyes, a startling shade of green, regarded her with evident skepticism. Been watching you sit there since about 7 this morning, he said. Whoever you're waiting for is mighty late. Virginia felt a flush of embarrassment color her cheeks. Yes, well, it appears there's been a misunderstanding. I was promised employment and accommodations that no longer exist. The man's expression softened slightly. New school teacher? She nodded, surprised. How did you know? Word gets around. Town's been without proper schooling since old Mrs. Fletcher followed her husband to Denver. Council made noise about finding a replacement, but then the council fell apart. He paused, studying her. You've come a long way for nothing, miss. Baxter, she supplied. Virginia Baxter. Garrett Hayes, he replied with a small nod. Most folks call me Gar. For a moment they regarded each other in silence. Virginia, acutely aware of how disheveled she must look after her journey and the morning spent in the sun. Finally, Garrett Hayes spoke again. You had any breakfast, Miss Baxter? The unexpected question made her stomach clench with renewed hunger. No, I haven't, Mr. Hayes. But I assure you, I'm perfectly— Wait here. Before she could finish her protest, he had turned and strode away, his long legs carrying him quickly across the street and into a building whose sign proclaimed it to be the Silver Dollar Cafe. Virginia watched him go, bewildered by the abrupt interaction. True to his word, Garrett Hayes returned minutes later, carrying a steaming mug in one hand and a wrapped bundle in the other. Coffee, he said, extending the mug, and some breakfast, Mrs. Larson's biscuits and ham. Best in the territory. Virginia hesitated, pride warring with hunger. Mr. Hayes, while I appreciate the gesture, I cannot accept— It's coffee and food, Miss Baxter, not charity. His voice was firm but not unkind. Take it before it gets cold. We can sort out the rest after you've eaten. The aroma of the coffee was too enticing to resist. Virginia accepted the mug with a murmured thanks, then the wrapped bundle. The first sip of coffee was blissfully strong and reviving, warming her from the inside out despite the heat of the day. Thank you, she said more sincerely after savoring the coffee. I confess I'm in something of a predicament. Garrett nodded, leaning against the post of the general store's awning. Seems that way. You got any folks back east who can help? Virginia shook her head. My parents passed some years ago. I have distant relations, but none who would— She trailed off, unwilling to elaborate on the circumstances of her departure from Boston. No, Mr. Hayes, I've no one to turn to. He was silent for a long moment, his gaze drifting down the street before returning to her face. Greeley's not a bad town, but opportunities for a lady of your upbringing are limited. I'm a trained teacher, she said with a touch of defensiveness, and I'm willing to work. Surely there must be children here in need of education. Oh, there are children aplenty, Garrett agreed. But organizing schooling requires money and leadership. Both are in short supply at the moment. Virginia unwrapped the bundle of food, her hunger overcoming any remaining hesitation. The biscuit was still warm, the ham flavorful, and she found herself devouring the simple meal with an enthusiasm that would have scandalized her former social circle. You said you were watching me this morning, she said between bites. May I ask why you decided to approach me now? A hint of a smile touched Garrett's lips. Figured anyone stubborn enough to sit on a trunk for 5 hours straight deserved at least a cup of coffee. Despite her circumstances, Virginia found herself returning his smile. There was something disarmingly direct about Garrett Hayes, a quality that seemed at odds with his rough appearance. "Well, I thank you for the coffee and the meal, Mr. Hayes. I suppose my next step is to inquire at the hotel about accommodations, though I fear my funds won't stretch far." Garrett pushed himself away from the post, seeming to come to some decision. "Hotel's full up with a group of cattle buyers from Kansas City, but I might have another option for you." "Oh?" Virginia asked, trying not to sound too hopeful. "My sister Rachel runs a small ranch just outside town. She's been talking about hiring help since her husband took ill last year. Nothing fancy, mind you, cooking, cleaning, helping with the children, but it would give you a roof and meals while you figure out your next move." The offer was both unexpected and potentially providential. Still, Virginia hesitated. "Your sister wouldn't mind a stranger arriving unannounced?" "Rachel's got a good heart and too much work for one woman. I was heading out there this afternoon anyway. Could bring you along, make the introductions." Virginia considered her options, which were admittedly few. Stay in town with dwindling funds and no prospects, or accept this cowboy's offer of potential employment with his sister. "Would I be able to return to town if the arrangement doesn't suit?" she asked cautiously. Garrett nodded. "It's only 4 miles out. I come in most days for supplies or business." 4 miles. Far enough to be isolated, but not impossibly remote. And what choice did she really have? "Very well, Mr. Hayes. I would be grateful for the introduction to your sister." "Good." He glanced at her trunk. "That's all your belongings?" "Yes. Everything I own is in that trunk." Garrett bent down and gripped the handle, lifting the heavy trunk with surprising ease. "I've got my wagon behind the livery. We can head out whenever you're ready." Virginia stood, brushing the dust from her skirts as best she could. "I'm ready now, Mr. Hayes, and truly, thank you for your kindness to a stranger." Something unreadable flickered across his features. "Out here, Miss Baxter, folks have to look out for each other. Town's not always kind to those on their own." As she followed him down the street, Virginia wondered if he was speaking from personal experience. There was a solitary quality to Garrett Hayes, a self-containment that suggested he understood well what it meant to stand alone. The wagon was a sturdy, no-nonsense conveyance, well used, but maintained with obvious care. Garrett loaded her trunk into the back, then offered his hand to help her onto the high seat. "It's not a fancy carriage," he said as he swung up beside her, "but Samson and Goliath here are reliable." He nodded toward the pair of large draft horses harnessed to the wagon. "They're magnificent animals," Virginia said honestly, admiring the powerful muscles beneath their gleaming coats. Garrett seemed pleased by her observation. "Raised them from colts. Best team in the county." He clicked his tongue and flicked the reins gently, setting the horses in motion. As they left the town behind, Virginia found herself studying her unexpected benefactor from the corner of her eye. Garrett Hayes presented a contradiction. He had the rough appearance of a frontier man, complete with the ever-present gun at his hip. Yet there was an intelligence in his eyes and a carefulness to his speech that suggested education beyond what one might expect. "You're not originally from Colorado Territory, are you, Mr. Hayes?" she ventured after they had traveled in companionable silence for some time. He glanced at her. One eyebrow raised. "What makes you say that?" "Your accent, or rather, your lack of one, and your manner of speech." A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "Observant. No, I'm not from here originally. Came west from Pennsylvania about 10 years ago, right after the war." "You fought in the war?" Virginia asked carefully, aware of how divisive the topic could still be, even 7 years after Appomattox. "Union cavalry," he confirmed with a nod. "Came home to find my father's farm mortgaged to the hilt and little future in staying. My sister had married and moved west with her husband already, so I followed." Virginia nodded, understanding. Many had sought new beginnings in the West after the war's devastation. "And you found what you were looking for?" Garrett was quiet for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the road ahead. "Found something different. Not sure it was what I was looking for, but it's a life I've made peace with." There was a story there, Virginia thought, but not one he seemed inclined to elaborate on. She respected his reticence after all. She had her own past she preferred not to discuss with strangers. "And your sister's ranch?" she asked instead. "What should I expect?" "Small operation compared to some. About 200 head of cattle, some horses. House is modest but solid. Rachel's husband James built it himself before he got sick. 3 children, Mary's 10, John's 8, and little Sarah's just turned 5. "And Mr. Rachel's husband, his illness?" Garrett's hands tightened slightly on the reins. "Took a fall from a horse 2 winters back. Damaged his spine. He can move around some with crutches, but can't ride or do the heavy work anymore." Virginia felt a pang of sympathy. That must be difficult for all of them. They manage. James does the books, makes the business decisions. Rachel handles the house and helps with the stock when she can. I pitch in, and they've got 2 hired hands who live in the bunkhouse. It's tight, but they get by. The landscape around them had changed as they talked, the flat plain giving way to gently rolling hills covered with prairie grass. In the distance, Virginia could make out a line of mountains, their peaks still capped with snow despite the summer heat. "It's beautiful country," she observed. "Gets in your blood," Garrett agreed. "Winter's harsh, summer's dry, and spring brings floods. But there's something about it that holds you." Virginia could understand the sentiment. Even in her brief time here, she'd felt the pull of the vast open spaces, so different from Boston's crowded streets and closed-in feeling. "There it is," Garrett said, nodding toward a cluster of buildings that had appeared on the horizon. Hayes Ranch. As they drew closer, Virginia could make out the details: a sturdy 2-story house built of logs and clapboard, a large barn, several smaller outbuildings, and a corral where horses grazed. Smoke rose from the house's chimney, and even from a distance she could see chickens pecking in the yard and washing, hanging on a line to dry in the summer breeze. It looked, she thought with a sudden ache of longing, like a home. A woman emerged from the house as their wagon approached, wiping her hands on her apron. Even at a distance, the family resemblance was clear. She had the same tall build as her brother, the same direct way of standing. "Rachel!" Garrett called as he brought the wagon to a halt in the yard. "You're early," his sister called back, moving toward them. "I wasn't expecting—" She stopped short, noticing Virginia for the first time. "You've brought company." Virginia felt a flutter of nervousness as Garrett helped her down from the wagon. What if his sister didn't want her here? What if the suggestion of employment had been premature? "Rachel, this is Miss Virginia Baxter," Garrett said. "Miss Baxter, my sister, Rachel Hayes Thornton." Rachel Thornton was a handsome woman in her early 30s, her dark hair streaked with premature silver at the temples, her green eyes so like her brother's, shrewd and assessing as they took in Virginia's travel-worn appearance. "Miss Baxter," she said with a polite nod, "welcome to our home." "Thank you, Mrs. Thornton. I apologize for arriving unannounced." Rachel's gaze shifted to her brother. "Gar?" "Miss Baxter came to town to be the new schoolteacher," he explained, "only to find the position no longer exists. She's got nowhere to go, and I remembered you saying you needed help around the place." Rachel's expression softened slightly. "I see. Well, Miss Baxter, my brother has a habit of collecting strays, but in this case, his timing might be fortunate. Please, come inside. You look like you could use a rest and something cool to drink." Virginia felt a surge of relief at the woman's words, even if they weren't exactly effusive. "You're very kind, Mrs. Thornton. Rachel, please, we don't stand on ceremony here." She turned to her brother. "Gar, bring in Miss Baxter's things. I'll show her to the spare room." As Garrett moved to retrieve her trunk from the wagon, Virginia followed Rachel toward the house, taking in more details of the ranch. Despite the obvious signs of hard work and limited resources, there was care in how the place was maintained. Flower beds bordered the front porch. The windows gleamed clean in the afternoon sun, and the wood of the porch steps had been recently swept. "It's a lovely home," Virginia said sincerely. Rachel glanced back, a hint of pride in her expression. "We've worked hard to make it so." She pushed open the front door. It's nothing fancy, but it's solid and keeps out the weather. The interior was simple but welcoming. The front door opened directly into a large room that served as both parlor and dining area. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, though it held no fire in the summer heat. Sturdy, handcrafted furniture filled the space, a large table with benches, several chairs, a small sofa. Colorful rag rugs softened the plank floors, and curtains of cheerful blue calico hung at the windows. "My husband's in town today with our oldest, seeing the doctor," Rachel explained as she led Virginia through to the kitchen at the back of the house. "The little ones are with our neighbor Mrs. Wilkins for the afternoon. Gives me a rare, quiet day to catch up on preserving." The kitchen was warm and fragrant with the smell of simmering fruit. Jars lined the countertop, and a large pot bubbled on the cast-iron stove. "Please, sit," Rachel gestured to a chair at the small kitchen table. "You look exhausted." Virginia sank gratefully into the chair, suddenly aware of just how tired she truly was. "Thank you. It's been a rather trying day." Rachel moved to the ceramic crock on the counter and poured a dipper of water into a glass. "Gar said you came for a teaching position." "Yes. I corresponded with the town council for months. Everything was arranged the position, lodging with a Mrs. Whitman." "Eliza Whitman," Rachel nodded, setting the glass of water before Virginia. "She passed this past winter, a lovely woman." "So I've been told." Virginia took a sip of the cool water. "When I arrived this morning, I discovered that not only had my intended landlady died, but the town council no longer exists, and with it, my position." Rachel frowned. "That's Greeley for you. Always grand plans, little follow-through." She returned to the stove, stirring the pot of what Virginia now saw was raspberry preserves. "So my brother found you stranded and decided to bring you home like a lost puppy." Despite the blunt words, there was no malice in Rachel's tone, and Virginia found herself smiling slightly. "He was kind enough to offer coffee and food when he found me sitting on my trunk, yes. That sounds like Gar." Rachel glanced toward the doorway as the man himself appeared, Virginia's trunk balanced easily on one shoulder. "Where do you want this, Rach?" he asked. "Upstairs, second door on the left, the small room." He nodded and disappeared again, his heavy footsteps sounding on the stairs. Rachel turned back to Virginia, her expression becoming more serious. "Miss Baxter, I should be clear. We're not wealthy people. The ranch does well enough, but with James's condition, we're stretched thin. I can offer you room and board and a small wage, very small, in exchange for help with the cooking, cleaning, and minding the children when needed. It won't be the comfortable life I imagine you're used to." Virginia straightened in her chair. "Mrs. Thornton, Rachel, I appreciate your candor. I'm not afraid of hard work, and at the moment, my alternatives are limited to non-existent. I would be grateful for the opportunity to earn my keep while I consider my options." Rachel studied her for a long moment, then gave a short nod. "Very well. We can try it for a month, see how it suits us both. I should warn you that the children can be a handful, especially John. And James has his difficult days when the pain is bad." "I understand." Virginia hesitated, then added, "I should tell you that while I have experience teaching children, my domestic skills are limited. I'm willing to learn, but there may be a period of adjustment." To her surprise, Rachel laughed, a warm, genuine sound. "At least you're honest. Don't worry, I don't expect you to know everything right away. We'll manage." Garrett returned to the kitchen, ducking his head slightly under the doorframe. "Trunk's upstairs. Need me for anything else before I check on the north pasture?" Rachel shook her head. "We'll be fine. Will you be back for supper?" "Likely. Depends on what I find out there." He turned to Virginia. "Miss Baxter, I'll leave you in my sister's capable hands." "Thank you again, Mr. Hayes." "For everything." He touched the brim of his hat in acknowledgement, then was gone, his footsteps receding through the house and out the front door. Rachel waited until the sound of his horse's hooves had faded before speaking again. "My brother doesn't usually involve himself in other people's troubles. You must have made quite an impression." Virginia felt her cheeks warm slightly. I assure you, Mrs. Thornton, our interaction was brief and entirely proper. A knowing smile touched Rachel's lips. I didn't suggest otherwise. But Garrett keeps to himself these days, has ever since he came back from Denver 2 years ago. She returned to the stove, lifting the pot off the heat. No matter. You're here now and we have work to do. Once you've rested a bit, perhaps you could help me fill these jars. Then I'll show you around the place before the children return and create their usual chaos. As Virginia watched Rachel efficiently preparing the preserving jars, she felt a cautious hope stir within her. Her situation was far from ideal, stranded in a strange territory, dependent on the charity of strangers, but at least she had shelter for the night and the prospect of honest work. It was more than she'd had just hours before, sitting alone on her trunk in the dusty streets of Greeley. What she couldn't know then was how completely her life was about to change, or that the tall, reserved cowboy who had brought her coffee would soon become the center of her world. The next few days passed in a blur of new experiences for Virginia. True to her word, Rachel put her to work immediately, but with patience and good humor that made the learning process less daunting. Virginia's first attempts at bread making were disastrous, her laundry techniques questionable at best, but she found she had a knack for organization and a natural way with the children that quickly endeared her to the family. James Thornton, Rachel's husband, proved to be a thoughtful, soft-spoken man whose injury had done nothing to diminish his sharp mind. He managed the ranch's finances and breeding program from his chair by the window, where he could observe the daily activities of the ranch. His initial reserved manner toward Virginia soon gave way to genuine appreciation for her help with the children, particularly in keeping young John occupied with reading lessons. The children themselves were a lively trio. Mary, the eldest at 10, was already taking on responsibilities beyond her years, helping her mother with household tasks and watching over her siblings. She regarded Virginia with a mixture of curiosity and wariness at first, but warmed to her when Virginia praised her needlework and offered to teach her some of the decorative stitches she had learned at school. John was a whirlwind of energy, constantly in motion, his mind racing as quickly as his feet. He showed little interest in books initially, but Virginia discovered that stories of exploration and adventure could capture his attention, especially when she incorporated elements of the natural world around them. 5-year-old Sarah was a sunny-natured child who attached herself to Virginia almost immediately, following her around the house and yard, chattering endlessly about the chickens, her rag doll Bessie, and her Uncle Gar, who brought her peppermint sticks from town. Garrett himself remained something of a mystery. He appeared at the ranch frequently, sometimes staying for meals, other times just long enough to confer with James about ranch business or to repair something that needed fixing. He was unfailingly polite to Virginia, but maintained a certain distance, as if uncertain how to interact with her beyond their initial meeting. It was on her 5th day at the ranch, as Virginia hung laundry on the line behind the house, that she finally had an opportunity for a real conversation with him. She had just pinned one of James's shirts to the line when she heard the sound of hammering from the nearby barn. Curious, she finished her task and made her way toward the sound. Garrett was in the barn, repairing one of the stall doors. He worked with focused concentration, driving nails with precise, powerful strokes. He had removed his vest in the heat of the day, and his shirt clung to his broad shoulders, damp with exertion. Virginia hesitated in the doorway, suddenly self-conscious. "Mr. Hayes?" He turned quickly, hammer still raised, then relaxed when he saw her. "Miss Baxter, didn't hear you approach." "I apologize for startling you. I was hanging laundry and heard the hammering." She gestured to the door he was fixing. "Is there something I can help with?" Garrett's eyebrows rose slightly in surprise. "You know carpentry, Miss Baxter?" She laughed, the sound echoing in the barn's open space. "No, certainly not, but I could hold things perhaps, or fetch tools. I find I'm eager to make myself useful in any way I can." He studied her for a moment, then nodded toward a toolbox on the ground beside him. "Could hand me those smaller nails if you've a mind to." Virginia crossed to the toolbox and located the requested nails, pleased to be of even this small assistance. As she handed them to him, their fingers brushed briefly, and she felt an unexpected jolt, like static electricity on a winter day. If Garrett noticed, he gave no sign. He simply thanked her and returned to his work, positioning a nail and driving it home with several sure strokes. "You're good at that," Virginia observed, watching him work. "Had plenty of practice. On a ranch, something's always breaking." He glanced at her as he reached for another nail. "How are you settling in?" "Well enough, I think. Your sister has been very patient with my domestic shortcomings." A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "Rachel mentioned your first attempt at biscuits, said they could have served as defensive weapons if the Cheyenne ever came calling again." Virginia felt her cheeks flush with embarrassment, but she couldn't help laughing at the description. "They were rather dreadful, weren't they? I've improved since then, I hope." "This morning's breakfast was certainly edible," Garrett agreed, his green eyes warming with amusement. "A marked improvement." Virginia leaned against the stall opposite him, watching as he fitted a new piece of wood into place. "May I ask you something, Mr. Hayes?" "You can ask. Can't promise I'll answer." "Fair enough." She hesitated, gathering her thoughts. "Your sister mentioned that you came back from Denver 2 years ago. I wonder what took you there, and why did you return?" The hammer paused mid-stroke. For a moment, Virginia thought he might ignore the question entirely. Then he sighed, setting the tool down. "Went to Denver for a woman," he said simply. "Came back without her." The stark answer held volumes of unspoken pain. "I'm sorry," Virginia said softly. "That was too personal a question." Garrett shook his head, picking up the hammer again. "It's no secret. Half the county knows the story. Courted a girl from over by Sterling Creek for nearly a year, Emily Wilcox. She wanted city life, so I took a job with the Wells Fargo office in Denver. Saved up, bought a ring, had plans for a small house." He drove a nail with particular force. "Week before the wedding, she changed her mind, ran off with a gambling man from San Francisco." Virginia winced at the tale. That must have been devastating. Pride took the worst hit. Another nail, another forceful strike. "Came back here, threw myself into helping with the ranch after James's accident. Life goes on." There was a finality to his tone that discouraged further questions on the subject. But Virginia found herself wondering about this Emily who had been foolish enough to abandon such a man for a gambler's uncertain promises. "And you?" Garrett asked suddenly, turning the conversation around. "Rachel says you're from Boston. What brings a proper Eastern lady all the way to Colorado territory alone?" Now it was Virginia's turn to consider how much to reveal. "Like you, I came west for a fresh start. Boston held painful memories." Garrett waited, clearly sensing there was more to the story. Virginia sighed. "I was engaged to be married. Edward Thornton, no relation to your brother-in-law, as far as I know was from one of Boston's oldest families. The match was considered quite a coup for my family, as my father was in trade, not old money." She twisted her hands together, remembering. 3 weeks before the wedding, I discovered Edward had been unfaithful. Not just once, but repeatedly, with a succession of women, including my own cousin. Garrett's expression darkened. "Sounds like a man in need of a good thrashing." A surprised laugh escaped her. "My brother Thomas had the same thought. Unfortunately, his attempt to defend my honor ended with him being arrested for assault. The scandal was significant." "So you ran west." "I removed myself from a situation that had become untenable," Virginia corrected gently. "The teaching position seemed providential, a chance to use my education and start anew where no one knew of my humiliation." Garrett nodded slowly, understanding in his eyes. "Seems we both know something about plans going awry." "Indeed," Virginia offered a small smile. "Yet, here we are." "Here we are," he agreed, returning her smile with one of his own, brief but genuine. They lapsed into a companionable silence as Garrett finished the repair. Virginia found herself studying his profile as he worked the strong line of his jaw, the way his dark hair curled slightly at the nape of his neck, the concentrated furrow between his brows. When the door was fixed, he gathered his tools, and they walked together back to the house, talking easily now about safer topics. The weather, the quality of the summer grass for the cattle, the antics of young Sarah, who had apparently decided that the chickens needed to learn their letters and had spent the morning attempting to teach them the alphabet. It was the first of many such conversations. Over the following weeks, Virginia found herself seeking out Garrett's company with increasing frequency, and he seemed equally drawn to hers. They would talk while she worked in the garden, and he mended harnesses on the porch, or in the evenings after the children were abed, when he sometimes lingered at the ranch rather than returning to his small cabin a mile distant. She learned that he was well-read despite his lack of formal education beyond the age of 16, that he had a dry wit that emerged when he was relaxed, and that despite his outward stoicism, he felt things deeply. She saw it in the gentle way he handled injured animals, in his infinite patience with Sarah's endless questions, in the protective way he watched over his sister's family. For his part, Garrett discovered that beneath Virginia's proper Boston exterior lay a woman of surprising resilience and adaptability. He admired her determination to master new skills, her unfailing kindness to his family, and the way she could laugh at her own mistakes. She brought something to the ranch that had been missing, a brightness, a sense of possibility that had been absent since James's accident had cast its shadow over their lives. Summer stretched into early autumn, the days growing shorter but still warm. Virginia's position at the ranch had long since moved beyond the initial 1-month trial period. She had become an integral part of the household, her presence so natural that it was difficult for any of them to remember a time before she had arrived. It was late September when Rachel finally broached the subject that had been on her mind for weeks. She and Virginia were in the kitchen, preparing supper, while the children helped their father in the garden, harvesting the last of the season's vegetables. "You and my brother seem to be getting on well," Rachel observed casually as she rolled out pie dough. Virginia looked up from the potatoes she was peeling, a slight flush coloring her cheeks. "Garrett has been very kind. Everyone here has." Rachel made a non-committal sound. "Kind isn't quite the word I'd use. Smitten might be more accurate." "Rachel," Virginia's flush deepened, "that's hardly appropriate?" "Perhaps not, but it's true all the same." Rachel cut the dough with practiced efficiency. "I haven't seen my brother look at a woman the way he looks at you since, well, ever. Not even Emily had him this twisted up." Virginia set down the knife, trying to compose herself. "You're mistaken. Mr. Hayes and I are friends, nothing more." "Mr. Hayes, is it?" Rachel laughed softly. "You call James by his given name. You call the Hands by theirs. But my brother remains Mr. Hayes despite all these weeks. Interesting, don't you think?" Virginia began, then stopped, unsure how to continue. The truth was, she had been careful to maintain that small formality with Garrett, a thin line of defense against the growing feelings she was reluctant to acknowledge even to herself. Rachel's expression softened as she looked at her friend. "Virginia, I'm not teasing you to cause discomfort, but I know my brother, and I know how lonely he's been, and I see how you light up when he enters a room." Virginia sighed, abandoning pretense. "Even if what you suggest were true for both of us, what would come of it? I have no place here beyond the charity you've shown me. Eventually I must find a real position, make my own way." "Must you?" Rachel asked quietly. "You have a place here, Virginia. With us. With Gar, if you want it." The words hung in the air between them, full of possibility and uncertainty. Before Virginia could formulate a response, the back door burst open and the children tumbled in. Arms full of carrots and late squash, their excited voices effectively ending the private conversation. But Rachel's words lingered in Virginia's mind as the day progressed, through supper and the evening routine of settling the children for bed. They were still with her later that night as she sat on the front porch, wrapped in a shawl against the growing autumn chill, gazing up at the vast canopy of stars overhead. She did not hear Garrett approach until his boot on the porch step startled her from her contemplation. "Evening, Miss Baxter," he said, removing his hat as he always did in her presence. "Mind if I join you?" "Please." She gestured to the empty chair beside her. "It's a beautiful night." He settled into the chair, his long legs stretched before him. "Thought you'd be inside with this chill in the air. I find I've grown accustomed to the Colorado nights. In fact, I quite enjoy them now." She drew her shawl a little tighter around her shoulders. "Though perhaps not the winter ones I've heard so much about." "They can be brutal," Garrett agreed. "But there's something to be said for a warm fire and a snug house when the snow's piling up outside." They sat in companionable silence for several minutes, watching as the moon rose over the distant mountains. "Rachel thinks you should stay," Garrett said abruptly. "Permanently, I mean." Virginia turned to look at him, surprised by the directness of the statement. In the silvery moonlight, his face was cast in shadow, making his expression difficult to read. "She mentioned something to that effect earlier," Virginia admitted. "And what do you think of the idea?" Virginia chose her words carefully. "I'm grateful for the suggestion. Your family has been incredibly kind to me, but I can't impose indefinitely. It's not an imposition if you're wanted." The simple statement sent a flutter through her chest. "Am I wanted, Mr. Hayes?" Garrett shifted in his chair, turning to face her more directly. "You know you are. By Rachel and James, by the children. And by you?" The words slipped out before she could stop them. There was a long pause, during which Virginia could hear nothing but the pounding of her own heart and the distant cry of a coyote somewhere in the hills. "Yes," Garrett said finally, his voice low and rough. "By me most of all." Virginia's breath caught in her throat. "Garrett," she said, using his given name for the first time. "I don't know what to say." He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, hands clasped before him. "You don't have to say anything now. I know this isn't what you came west for. You were looking for independence, a fresh start, not another entanglement." "Is that what this would be? An entanglement?" She couldn't keep a hint of hurt from her voice. Garrett shook his head quickly. "No, that's not what I meant. I'm not good with words, Virginia. Never have been." He took a deep breath. "What I'm trying to say is that I care for you, more than I thought I could care for anyone again after Emily. But I don't want to be something that holds you back from what you want." Virginia found herself moving to the edge of her chair, closer to him. "What if what I want has changed since I arrived here?" Hope flickered across his face, visible even in the dim light. "Has it?" "I think perhaps it has." She reached out hesitantly, placing her hand over his clasped ones. "When I came west, I was running from something. From hurt, from scandal. I thought teaching would be my salvation, my way of creating a new life. But now," Garrett prompted, his hands turning to hold hers. "Now I find that the life I've found here, unexpectedly, means more to me than the one I planned." Virginia's voice trembled slightly. "Your family has become dear to me, and you, Garrett Hayes, have become dearer still." The confession hung in the air between them, fraught with vulnerability and hope. Garrett's hands tightened around hers. "Virginia," he began, then seemed to lose his words again. Instead of speaking, he moved slowly, deliberately, giving her every chance to pull away as he leaned toward her. She didn't pull away. Instead, she met him halfway, her free hand coming up to touch his cheek, as their lips met in a kiss that was gentle at first, then increasingly urgent as the feelings they had both been containing broke free. When they finally parted, both slightly breathless, Garrett rested his forehead against hers. "I've been wanting to do that for weeks," Virginia laughed softly. "As have I, though I would never have admitted it." He drew back slightly to look into her eyes. "I don't have much to offer, Virginia. A small cabin, a cowboy's wages, a life that's harder than what you knew back east." "I've discovered that what I value has changed significantly," she replied. "Honesty, kindness, a true partnership, these mean more to me now than the material comforts of my previous life." Garrett brushed a strand of hair from her face with tender care. "I can promise you those things. and to work every day to give you a good life, if you'll have me." The sincerity in his voice, the depth of feeling in his eyes, moved Virginia deeply. This was nothing like the practiced gallantry of Edward Thornton or the calculated courtships of Boston society. This was real, a man offering his heart plainly, honestly, without artifice or agenda. "I would be honored to have you, Garrett Hayes," she whispered, "if you'll have me as well, with all my lack of domestic skills and Eastern ways." His smile was like the sunrise breaking over the mountains. "I happen to think your Eastern ways are just what this place needs. And as for your cooking, well, it's improving daily." Virginia laughed and smacked his arm lightly. "You're supposed to say it's perfect already." "I promised honesty, didn't I?" His eyes crinkled with amusement. "Besides, I like watching you learn. You have a determination that's something to behold." Their second kiss was longer, deeper, a sealing of promises spoken and unspoken. When they finally separated, Garrett kept her hand in his, unwilling to break the connection between them. "We should go in," Virginia said reluctantly. "It's getting colder." Garrett nodded, but neither of them moved immediately. "One more thing," he said. "I want to do this properly. Court you as you deserve, not rush into anything." Virginia smiled, touched by his consideration. "I would like that, though perhaps not too long a courtship. At my age, I find I've less patience for prolonged waiting than I once did." "At your age," Garrett laughed. "You're what, 25? 27, she corrected. "Practically a spinster by Boston standards." "Well, by Colorado standards, you're just right." He stood, drawing her up with him. "Come on, let's get you inside before you catch a chill. We'll tell Rachel and James our news in the morning." "They'll be pleased, I think," Virginia said as they walked hand in hand toward the door. "Rachel will be insufferably smug," Garrett predicted. "She's been dropping hints about you since your second week here." "Has she indeed?" Virginia laughed. "And here I thought I was being so circumspect with my feelings." Garrett paused at the door, looking down at her with warm affection. "About as circumspect as I was, I'd wager. Which is to say, not at all." As Virginia followed him into the warmth of the house that had become her home, she marveled at the twisting path that had led her here. The disappointment of that first day in Greeley, sitting alone on her trunk, had given way to a joy she could never have anticipated. The cowboy who had brought her coffee and a place to rest had brought her so much more, a family, a home, and a love that promised to sustain her through whatever challenges lay ahead in this wild, beautiful land. The next morning dawned clear and bright, a perfect early autumn day. Virginia woke with the sun, her heart lighter than it had been in years. The memory of the previous evening, Garrett's declaration, their kisses on the porch, brought a smile to her face as she dressed for the day. As she had predicted, Rachel and James received their news with genuine delight. The children's reactions varied. Mary was cautiously pleased, John largely indifferent, except for his concern about whether this meant his uncle would still take him fishing, and Sarah ecstatic at the prospect of Virginia becoming officially part of the family. "Does this mean you'll live in Uncle Gar's cabin?" Sarah asked at breakfast, her small face serious. "It's very small. I don't think your trunk will fit." The adults exchanged amused glances. "We have some time to figure that out, little one," Virginia assured her. "Your uncle and I are going to court properly first." "What's court?" Sarah wanted to know. "It means they're going to spend time getting to know each other better before they get married," Rachel explained, passing the biscuits. "But they already know each other," John pointed out practically. "Uncle Gar's here all the time." "There's knowing and then there's knowing," James said with a wink at his wife. "Trust me, son, the courting time is important." Despite the teasing, Garrett and Virginia did take their courtship seriously. Over the following weeks, he would come to the ranch not just to work, but to specifically spend time with her. They took rides together across the rolling prairie, picnicked by the creek that ran through the property, and on Sundays attended church in Greeley, where their courtship became the subject of much approving gossip. Virginia found herself falling more deeply in love with each passing day. Away from the ranch and his work, Garrett revealed more of himself to her, his hopes for the future, his regrets about the past, his quiet dreams of someday having his own family. She, in turn, shared her own aspirations, her fears, the parts of herself she had always kept guarded in Boston society. As October gave way to November, there was a sense of anticipation in the air. The first snow dusted the mountains, a harbinger of the winter to come. Ranch work took on a new urgency as final preparations were made for the cold months ahead. It was during this busy time that Garrett approached Virginia with an unexpected suggestion. They were walking back from the barn one evening after checking on a mare that was close to foaling, their breath making clouds in the chill air. "I've been thinking," Garrett said, his hand warm around hers despite the cold, "about our future." "Oh?" Virginia looked up at him, noting the serious cast to his features. "What about it specifically?" "My cabin is too small for us, like Sarah said, but building a new house before winter is impossible now." He paused, seeming to gather his thoughts. "James and Rachel have offered us the downstairs bedroom if we want to marry before spring. They'd move upstairs with the children." Virginia stopped walking, surprised by the suggestion. "They'd give up their room for us?" "For a few months until the weather breaks and we can start building." Garrett turned to face her fully. "It's not ideal, I know. You'd have little privacy, and it's not much of a start to married life, sharing a house with my sister's family." "Garrett," Virginia interrupted gently, "are you asking me to marry you now, rather than waiting for spring?" He nodded, suddenly looking uncertain. "I am. Selfishly, I don't want to wait. But I'll understand if you'd prefer to hold off, have a proper house of our own from the start." Virginia felt a surge of love for this man who continued to put her wishes above his own, even when it cost him. "Garrett Hayes, nothing would make me happier than becoming your wife, whether we have a palace or a tent to start our life together." Relief and joy spread across his face. "You're sure? It won't be easy, all of us in one house through the winter." "I'm certain." Virginia reached up to touch his cheek. "These past months have taught me that home isn't about the building or the furnishings. It's about the people who fill it with love. And I already love this family. Your family is my own." Garrett pulled her into his arms, heedless of anyone who might see from the house windows. "Then, Virginia Baxter, will you do me the great honor of becoming my wife before the first real snow of winter?" "Yes," she whispered against his chest. "With all my heart, yes." The wedding took place on the last Saturday of November, a clear, cold day with the promise of snow in the air. The small church in Greeley was filled with the friends the Hayes family had made over their years in the area, along with a fair number of curious townspeople drawn by the romantic tale of the Eastern schoolteacher and the cowboy who had found her stranded. Virginia wore a dress of deep blue wool that Rachel had helped her make, with a lace collar that had once belonged to Garrett's mother. Her hair was arranged simply but elegantly, crowned with a wreath of dried autumn flowers and sage that Mary had helped to create. Garrett, standing at the altar in a new shirt and his best pants, looked both nervous and prouder than Virginia had ever seen him. When she entered the church on James's arm, he had insisted on performing this duty despite his crutches. Garrett's expression of wonder and love was something she knew she would remember all her days. The ceremony was brief but heartfelt. They exchanged simple vows and rings, hers a delicate gold band that had been Garrett's grandmother's, his a plain band purchased in Denver during a hasty trip the week before. When the minister pronounced them man and wife, Garrett's kiss was restrained in deference to their audience, but his eyes promised more when they were alone. The celebration afterward was held at the ranch, the house filled to bursting with well-wishers. Rachel had outdone herself with the wedding feast, and even Virginia's contribution, a 3-layer cake that had taken 2 attempts to get right, was declared a triumph. As evening fell and the guests began to depart, Virginia found herself watching her new husband across the room. He was deep in conversation with James and several neighboring ranchers, his face animated as they discussed some point of cattle management. Sensing her gaze, he looked up and smiled a private, intimate smile that made her heart race despite the crowd around them. "He's a good man, my brother," Rachel said, appearing at Virginia's side with 2 cups of coffee. "One of the best I know." Virginia accepted the coffee gratefully. "I know. I count myself fortunate beyond measure." Rachel squeezed her arm affectionately. "We all do. Having you here these past months has brought new life to this family. And I've never seen Gar so happy." "Nor I," Virginia admitted softly. "I came west seeking independence, but I found something far more precious." "That's often the way of it," Rachel smiled. "The best things in life are rarely those we plan for." The last guests departed just as the first snowflakes began to fall, large, lazy flakes that promised a significant accumulation by morning. James and Rachel tactfully shepherded the children upstairs earlier than usual, leaving the newlyweds alone in the downstairs bedroom that had been transformed with fresh curtains, new bedding, and small touches to make it their own space within the shared home. Virginia stood by the window, watching the snow begin to blanket the yard when she heard the door open and close behind her. Garrett's arm slipped around her waist, drawing her back against his chest. "Wife," he said softly, the word sending a pleasurable shiver through her. "Are you cold by the window?" "Not anymore," she replied, leaning into his embrace. "The snow is beautiful." "Not as beautiful as you." He turned her in his arms to face him. "I keep thinking I'll wake up and find this was all a dream, that you'll be gone, and I'll be alone in my cabin again." Virginia reached up to trace the line of his jaw, the reality of him solid and warm beneath her fingers. "No dream, my love. I'm here, and I'm yours. Forever." His kiss was tender at first, then increasingly urgent as the restraint they had maintained throughout their courtship finally gave way to the passion they both felt. When he lifted her into his arms and carried her to their bed, Virginia went willingly, joyfully, into the embrace of the man who had found her sitting alone on her trunk and had given her not just coffee and rest, but a future filled with love. The winter of 1872-1873 proved to be one of the harshest in memory for Colorado Territory. Snow fell frequently and heavily, often confining the inhabitants of the Hayes Ranch to the house for days at a time. Yet despite the close quarters and occasional tensions that inevitably arose from so many people sharing a small space, Virginia found herself treasuring these months. There was a special kind of intimacy in the winter evenings, with the wind howling outside and the family gathered around the fire. James would often read aloud while Rachel and Virginia sewed or mended, the children playing quiet games on the rug, and Garrett whittling or repairing tack by the light of the oil lamps. Nights were their own private time. Despite the thin walls and the need for discretion, Virginia and Garrett discovered the depths of their passion for each other. In the cocoon of their shared bed, they learned each other's bodies as thoroughly as they had come to know each other's minds and hearts during their courtship. By February, when Virginia missed her monthly courses for the second time, there was no denying the truth. She was with child. "Are you certain?" Garrett asked when she told him, his voice hushed in the pre-dawn darkness of their room. "As certain as one can be without a doctor's confirmation," Virginia replied, guiding his hand to rest on her still flat abdomen. "The baby would come in late summer, I think." The wonder on Garrett's face as he processed this news was something Virginia knew she would never forget. Joy, fear, pride, and overwhelming love all chased across his features. "A baby," he whispered. "Our baby." "Our baby," she confirmed, tears of happiness pricking her eyes. "Are you pleased, husband?" In answer, Garrett gathered her into his arms, his kiss conveying everything words could not. They made love slowly, reverently, both acutely aware of the new life growing between them. The news of Virginia's pregnancy added fresh urgency to their plans for a home of their own. As soon as the spring thaw began in earnest, Garrett and the ranch hands began work on a house site a quarter-mile from the main ranch house, close enough for convenience and safety, but far enough for privacy. Virginia's pregnancy progressed without complications, though the morning sickness that plagued her through the early months tested her resilience. Rachel was an invaluable support, having been through childbearing 3 times herself. She guided Virginia through the process of preparing for the baby while also helping her continue to improve her domestic skills. By May, Virginia's condition was obvious even beneath the looser clothing she had begun to wear. Her body changed daily, it seemed, growing rounder and fuller. Garrett found these changes endlessly fascinating, his hands and eyes drawn to the physical evidence of their love. "You're more beautiful than ever," he told her one evening as they walked together to check on the progress of their house. "Radiant." Virginia laughed, one hand supporting her lower back, which had begun to ache with the weight of the child. "I feel enormous, and it's only going to get worse. Mrs. Wilkins says I'm carrying like it's a boy all out front." "Boy or girl doesn't matter," Garrett said, his arm steady around her waist. "Healthy is all I care about, both of you." They reached the building site as the sun was beginning its descent behind the mountains. The house was taking shape rapidly now, the frame complete, the roof on, walls going up room by room. It was a modest structure, just 4 rooms to start, but built with careful attention to detail and the possibility of expansion as their family grew. "It's going to be perfect," Virginia said, leaning against her husband as they surveyed what would soon be their home. "Our own place at last. Should be ready by mid-July, barring any problems." Garrett pressed a kiss to her temple. "In plenty of time before the baby comes." Virginia smiled, feeling the child move within her. "I think he or she is anxious to see it too." They were moving into their new home, still smelling of fresh-cut lumber and paint, when Virginia first felt the contractions. She said nothing at first, not wanting to alarm Garrett or halt the moving process. But by evening, as they sat on their new porch watching the sunset, the pains had become regular enough that she could no longer hide her discomfort. "Virginia?" Garrett asked, noticing her wince as a particularly sharp contraction gripped her. "What's wrong?" "I think," she said carefully, "that our child may be eager to see the new house as well. The pains started this morning." Garrett's face paled. "The baby's coming? Now? But it's too early, you said late August." "Babies come when they're ready, not when we expect them," Virginia said, trying to keep her voice calm despite her own rising anxiety. "We should send for Rachel and the midwife." The next hours passed in a blur of pain and fear for Virginia. The midwife, Mrs. Guthrie, arrived promptly, brought by a ranch hand who had ridden at breakneck speed to fetch her. Rachel came moments later, taking charge of the situation with calm efficiency. "First babies often come early," she assured Virginia, as she helped her change into a nightgown and settle into the new bed that Garrett had built with his own hands. "And you're strong. You'll do fine." The labor was long and difficult. Through the night and into the next day, Virginia endured wave after wave of contractions, each seeming stronger than the last. Garrett was relegated to the porch by Mrs. Guthrie's strict orders, but Virginia could hear him pacing, his footsteps a constant reminder of his presence and support, even as the physical process of bringing their child into the world was something she had to face without him. It was late afternoon when the final stage of labor began. Virginia, exhausted beyond anything she had ever experienced, found reserves of strength she didn't know she possessed. With Rachel supporting her back and Mrs. Guthrie's experienced hands guiding the process, she pushed with all her might. "I can see the head," Mrs. Guthrie exclaimed. "Dark hair, like its daddy. One more big push, Mrs. Hayes. That's it." With a final, monumental effort, Virginia felt her child slip from her body, the relief immediate and overwhelming. A moment of silence, and then the most beautiful sound she had ever heard, the lusty cry of her baby. "A boy," Mrs. Guthrie announced triumphantly. "A fine, healthy boy." Tears streamed down Virginia's face as the midwife quickly cleaned the infant and placed him on her chest. She stared in wonder at the tiny, perfect face, the shock of dark hair, the miniature hands that seemed to reach for her instinctively. "Garrett," she called weakly. "Garrett, come meet your son." The door burst open, and Garrett was at her side in an instant, his face a study in awe and love as he beheld his wife and newborn child. "Virginia," he breathed, reaching out a trembling hand to touch the baby's cheek. "He's magnificent. You're magnificent." "What will you name him?" Rachel asked softly, wiping tears from her own eyes at the beauty of the moment. Virginia looked up at her husband. They had discussed names but had not made a final decision, wanting to see their child first. "Thomas," she said, honoring her brother who had defended her honor at such cost to himself. "Thomas James Hayes." "Perfect," Garrett agreed, his voice thick with emotion. "Welcome to the world, Thomas James. You have the most amazing mother a boy could ask for." Virginia smiled up at him, exhausted but filled with a joy she had never imagined possible. "And the most devoted father," she added. "Our family, Garrett, just as we dreamed." As the summer faded into autumn, Virginia adjusted to the demands and joys of motherhood. Thomas, called TJ by his father, thrived under the doting attention of his parents and extended family. The tiny house became a home, filled with love and the simple daily routines that defined their life together. Garrett proved to be a natural father, as comfortable cradling his son as he was handling a spirited horse or mending a fence. He would often bring TJ with him for the morning chores, the baby secured in a sling across his chest, talking to him constantly about the ranch, the animals, the land that would someday be his heritage. Virginia found motherhood both more challenging and more rewarding than she had anticipated. There were nights when TJ would not settle, when exhaustion threatened to overwhelm her. But Garrett was always there, taking the baby for walks around the room, singing softly in his surprisingly melodious baritone until the child finally slept. As TJ grew from newborn to infant, Virginia gradually resumed her involvement in the wider operations of the ranch. She had discovered during her pregnancy that she had a talent for the bookkeeping aspects of the business, and James had been happy to share this responsibility with her. Now, with the baby often napping in a basket beside her, she would spend hours with the ledgers, finding satisfaction in bringing order to the ranch's finances. Their first Christmas as a family was a joyous occasion. The house was decorated with pine boughs and red ribbons, the scent of Virginia's now perfected baking filling the air. TJ, nearly 5 months old, was passed from arm to arm, delighting everyone with his sunny smiles and growing awareness of the world around him. That night, after everyone had gone and TJ was finally asleep in the cradle Garrett had crafted for him, Virginia found her husband standing by the window, looking out at the star-filled sky. "What are you thinking about?" she asked, slipping her arms around his waist and resting her cheek against his back. "How different this Christmas is from the last," he replied, covering her hands with his own. "Last year I was alone in my cabin, wondering if I'd ever have a family of my own, and now you have a wife who loves you beyond measure," Virginia said, "and a son who thinks his father hung the moon and stars." Garrett turned in her embrace, drawing her close. "I never thought I could be this happy, Virginia. Never thought I deserved it." "Oh, my love," she whispered, reaching up to touch his face. "You deserve every happiness. You've given me so much: a home, a family, a life filled with purpose and love. How could you think you deserve any less?" His kiss was tender, filled with the love that had grown deeper and stronger through the months of their marriage. "I thank God every day that I happened to be in town the morning you arrived," he murmured against her lips, "that I saw you sitting on that trunk, looking so lost and determined all at once." Virginia smiled at the memory that now seemed to belong to another lifetime. "And I thank God you were the kind of man who would bring coffee to a stranded stranger." "Best decision I ever made," Garrett said, lifting her into his arms with the same strength and sureness he had shown on their wedding night. "Now, Mrs. Hayes, shall we see about giving young Thomas a brother or sister?" Virginia laughed, wrapping her arms around his neck as he carried her toward their bedroom. "Why, Mr. Hayes, I thought you'd never ask." As the years passed, the small house expanded along with their family. Thomas James was joined by a sister, Eleanor Rachel, in 1875, and then by another brother, William Edward, in 1877. The ranch prospered under the combined efforts of the extended Hayes family, surviving the harsh winters and the occasional drought years through hard work, careful management, and the deep bonds that held them together. Virginia never did become a school teacher, as she had originally planned, but she found her calling nonetheless. When TJ reached school age, she began teaching him and his cousins at home, a practice that soon expanded to include the children of neighboring ranches. The informal school that operated from the Hayes Ranch became known throughout the area for its quality of education, with Virginia incorporating both traditional subjects and practical knowledge suited to their Western life. Garrett, meanwhile, gradually took over more of the ranch management as James's health began to decline in the later years of the decade. He proved to have a natural head for business, as well as a deep understanding of the land and the animals, qualities that allowed the ranch to grow and prosper, even as many others struggled during the economic downturns of the era. On a warm summer evening in 1882, 10 years after Virginia had first arrived in Greeley, she and Garrett sat on their porch watching their children play in the yard. TJ, now 9, was teaching his younger siblings a game involving a ball and complicated rules that seemed to change whenever Eleanor, 7, or Will, 5, looked likely to win. "Do you ever regret it?" Garrett asked suddenly, his hand warm around hers. "Not becoming the school teacher you set out to be?" Virginia looked at him in surprise. "Regret? How could I possibly regret the life we've built together?" "You had plans," he reminded her, "dreams of your own. And I've fulfilled them, just not in the way I expected." She squeezed his hand. "I teach, Garrett. Perhaps not in a traditional schoolhouse, but I've shaped more young minds here than I ever could have in a town position. And I have a family, a home, a purpose. What more could anyone ask for?" He smiled, the lines around his eyes deepening lines earned from years of sun and wind and laughter. "You always do that, you know." "Do what?" "See the blessing in what others might view as disappointment." He brought her hand to his lips. "It's one of the many reasons I love you more with each passing year." Virginia leaned against his shoulder, watching as TJ successfully hit the ball past Eleanor's outstretched hands, prompting cheers from Will and protests from his sister about the constantly changing rules. "Do you remember that day?" she asked softly, "when you found me sitting on my trunk?" "Like it was yesterday," Garrett confirmed. "You looked so out of place and so determined all at once. I couldn't take my eyes off you. And yet you waited hours before approaching me." He chuckled. "I was working up my courage. Beautiful Eastern lady like you, I figured you'd dismiss me outright. Instead, I practically fell on the coffee you offered." "Best cup of coffee I ever bought," Garrett said, his voice warm with memory. "Though I had no idea where it would lead us." Virginia turned her face up to his, love welling in her heart for this good, steadfast man who had become her everything. "I think perhaps a part of me knew, even then, that you were the reason I had come west, not for a teaching position that never materialized, but for you, for us, for this life we've created together." Garrett's kiss was as sweet and stirring as the first they had shared on Rachel's porch all those years ago. "I love you, Virginia Hayes," he murmured, "more than I have words to say." "And I love you," she replied, her hand resting over his heart. "My cowboy who brought coffee and gave me a place to rest, and then gave me a life beyond my wildest dreams." As the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Virginia watched her children playing in the yard of the home she and Garrett had built together. The journey that had begun with disappointment and uncertainty, a young woman sitting alone on her trunk in a dusty frontier town, had led to a life rich with love, purpose, and belonging. It wasn't the life she had planned when she left Boston. It was infinitely better.